A mother, meant to nurture and protect, now stands accused of the unthinkable. 3 young lives, lost under circumstances too strange, too chilling, to ignore. At first they were seen as tragedies, 3 children taken too soon. A grieving mother, a devastated family. But as the bodies piled up, so did the questions. Was she a heartbroken mother? Or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? It started with Melina, then Iris, and finally little Georgina. 3 deaths in 3 years, a coincidence? Or a carefully orchestrated plan? Doctors began to whisper. Authorities took a second look. And what they found would shake an entire nation to its core. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a terrifying pattern, a mother's darkest secret that sent shockwaves through Greece. This is the disturbing case of Roula Pispirigou. To understand the crimes, we must first understand the woman at the center of them. Who is Roula Pispirigou, and what kind of person was she before the world knew her name? Born in 1989 in the coastal city of Patras, Roula Pispirigou was raised in what many would describe as a typical Greek household. Small-town life, traditional values, a tight-knit community. But beneath the surface, something was different about Roula. Those who knew her as a child describe a girl who always craved attention. But not in the way most children do. She wasn't loud, she wasn't outgoing. Instead, she was calculating. She knew how to twist the truth, how to play the victim, and how to make people feel sorry for her. As she grew older, her need for attention evolved. She would exaggerate illnesses, fabricate dramatic stories, and create chaos just to make sure the spotlight never left her. Those closest to her say she was unpredictable, a woman who would go to great lengths to control the narrative around her. But her need for control extended beyond just words. In relationships she was possessive, demanding, and obsessive. And it was in love that her darkest traits would begin to surface. When Roula met Manos Daskalakis, she thought she had found her perfect match. Young, charming, and easily manipulated. They married quickly, but what seemed like a fairy tale soon unraveled into something far more sinister. Manos would later describe their marriage as suffocating, filled with jealousy, paranoia, and control. Every aspect of their life together was dictated by Roula's emotional outbursts. She had to be the center of his world. And if she wasn't, she would make sure he paid the price. But soon there was something, or rather someone, new who could shift attention away from Roula, their firstborn daughter Georgina. 3 little girls, each with a life full of promise, each taken too soon. To the world they were headlines. But before their names became part of a criminal case, they were just children. And they deserved to be remembered for who they were, not just how they died. Georgina was strong-willed, full of life. She loved music, she loved to dance, she was a fighter. And perhaps that was the problem. Because when she survived the first incident, she became a problem for Roula. She remembered too much, she could tell too much. Melina was the first. A child with a bright smile, taken under mysterious circumstances in 2019. Doctors were baffled, but no one suspected the mother. Not yet. Then came Iris, just 6 months old. An innocent baby who barely had time to understand the world before it was stolen from her. 3 children. 3 unexplained deaths. And one mother, always at the center of it all. Manos Daskalakis claims he had no idea what was happening under his own roof. But could that be true? Was he simply blind to the signs, or was he complicit in some way? And what about Roula's parents? Did they suspect? Or did they refuse to see the truth? Neighbors whispered. Family members hesitated. But no one spoke out. Until it was too late. One by one, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. And what investigators uncovered next would change everything. Hospitals are places of healing. A place where parents bring their sick children with hope, expecting to take them home. But for 3 young girls, a hospital became the last place they would ever be seen alive. And their mother, Roula Pispirigou, was always there. One by one, the daughters of Roula Pispirigou fell victim to sudden, mysterious illnesses. Doctors searched for explanations. But the deeper they looked, the more disturbing the truth became. Melina, Iris, Georgina. 3 young lives, 3 sudden deaths. Were they just a tragic coincidence? Or was something far more sinister at play? Melina was a joyful, healthy 3-year-old. She loved to sing, dance, and like any child, she adored her mother. But on April 13, 2019, everything changed. According to Roula, Melina had been feeling unwell for days. Doctors examined her, ran tests, and monitored her condition. But no one expected what would happen next. She died suddenly. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. Doctors determined the cause of death to be liver failure. It was tragic, but believable. At least at first. But there was one problem. Melina had no history of liver issues. And something about the way she died didn't sit right with the medical staff. Despite their doubts, there was no concrete evidence of foul play. The case was closed. Roula mourned. And life moved on. But just 10 months later, it would happen again. Iris was only 6 months old, the youngest of the 3 sisters. A baby who never had the chance to take her first steps, to say her first words. On January 21, 2021, just before sunrise, Roula called for help. Iris was not breathing. Paramedics did everything they could. But it was too late. The tiny infant was declared dead at the hospital. The cause? A rare, sudden heart defect. An explanation that, once again, seemed plausible, but deeply troubling. 2 children. 2 sudden deaths. Both under the care of the same mother. Some began to ask, was this just an unimaginable stroke of bad luck? Or was something much darker at play? Georgina was different from her sisters. She was older, stronger. And when the tragedies took her siblings, she was left to carry the weight of their loss. But what no one realized was that Georgina would soon become a target herself. In 2022, Georgina suffered a sudden, unexplained medical episode that left her in a coma. Doctors fought to save her, and against all odds, she survived. It should have been the end of the nightmare, the second chance at life. But in Roula's world, there were no second chances. On January 29, 2022, Georgina was found dead in her hospital bed. The cause? A lethal dose of ketamine, an anesthetic she should never have had access to. And this time, the doctors knew. This was no medical mystery. This was murder. 3 deaths, 1 mother, and a horrifying truth that was finally about to be exposed. For years, the deaths of 3 little girls had been accepted as tragic misfortunes. A grieving mother, a devastated family. But behind hospital doors, behind closed meetings and whispered conversations, a disturbing realization was beginning to take shape. 3 deaths. 3 unexplained medical crises. And one common denominator, Roula Pispirigou. It started with Georgina. When doctors discovered ketamine in her system, an anesthetic never prescribed to her, questions arose. And those questions led to an even darker truth. If Georgina was murdered, could Melina and Iris have been as well? Doctors began reviewing past cases. Melina's death, originally blamed on liver failure, was re-examined. But there was no medical reason for her liver to fail so suddenly. Then came Iris, the 6-month-old baby. A supposed heart defect that had no prior warning signs. The inconsistencies were piling up. And the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. With the weight of forensic science behind them, the authorities could no longer turn a blind eye. The investigation into Roula Pispirigou had officially begun. Detectives and forensic specialists were called in. The mission was clear: build an airtight case. But to do that, they needed hard proof. And that proof came from the very thing Roula could not control: science. The toxicology reports told a chilling story. Not just about Georgina but about Melina and Iris as well. Investigators found traces of dangerous substances, ones that should never have been in their systems. 1 case was tragic. 2 were suspicious. 3? That was murder. Police began to examine security footage from the hospitals where Roula's children had died. What they found was deeply unsettling. The moments leading up to each medical crisis? Roula was always there. And in every instance, she was the only adult present. The walls were closing in. And soon, Roula Pispirigou would find herself in the spotlight, not as a grieving mother but as a prime suspect. But Roula did what she had always done. She denied everything. She took to the media, portraying herself as a heartbroken mother, a victim of relentless accusations. "They want to blame me because they need someone to blame," she told reporters. But her performance was far from convincing. The more she spoke, the deeper she buried herself in inconsistencies. She contradicted herself. She evaded direct questions. And when asked about the ketamine, her response was chillingly vague. But science had already caught up with her lies. The toxicology results were irrefutable. And when confronted with this evidence, Roula's confidence began to crack. March 2022, the moment the nation had been waiting for. Police arrived at Roula Pispirigou's home. She was no longer untouchable. No longer a grieving mother shielded by tragedy. She was a suspect. And the law had finally come knocking. The arrest was swift. A nation watched as Roula Pispirigou was placed in handcuffs, accused of the unthinkable. The case that had started in hospital rooms had now reached the courtroom. The arrest sent shockwaves through Greece. How could a mother do this? How had she gotten away with it for so long? The trial would soon begin. And the world would finally hear the full story. Coming up next, the trial of Roula Pispirigou. A courtroom battle that would reveal the horrifying depths of deception, manipulation, and murder. The world had seen her as a grieving mother. A woman who had lost not one, but 3 children. But now Roula Pispirigou stood before the court, accused of the unthinkable. The prosecution called it murder. She called it injustice. The trial that would captivate a nation was about to begin. As the doors of the courtroom swung open, the weight of the case was undeniable. The prosecution had built its case on science, motive, and cold, hard evidence. The defense? They would attempt to unravel it. The battle for truth had begun. The prosecution wasted no time. Their first witnesses were the very people who had suspected Roula from the beginning, doctors and forensic experts. They laid out the medical evidence, the toxicology reports, the lethal dose of ketamine found in Georgina's system, administered when only Roula was in the room. The timing was no coincidence. The prosecutor turned to Roula. You were the only person in that room. Can you explain how your daughter was poisoned? The courtroom held its breath. Roula's defense team had been preparing for months. Their argument? The evidence was circumstantial. The ketamine? A tragic hospital error. The deaths? A cruel twist of fate. They called for doubt. A grieving mother being labeled a murderer? Without conclusive proof. They painted her as a victim of a justice system desperate for someone to blame. But the prosecution had more. They presented testimonies. Hospital staff recalled Roula's reactions after each death, oddly composed, at times even dismissive. One nurse testified that when Georgina was resuscitated the first time, Roula seemed displeased. She didn't ask if Georgina would recover. She asked why she was still alive. The courtroom gasped. The evidence was damning. The jury listened. The nation watched. But was Roula a calculated killer? Or was there something even more sinister beneath the surface? To understand Roula Pispirigou, experts had to look beyond the courtroom. Was she truly a mother who killed? Or was there a deeper psychological storm brewing within her? Forensic psychologists examined her history. A pattern of attention-seeking behavior. A need to control the narrative. Could it be that she thrived on sympathy? That the deaths of her children kept her in the spotlight? Some experts pointed to Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare disorder where a caregiver harms someone in their care to gain attention. But others rejected this theory. They believed Roula knew exactly what she was doing. That this wasn't a disorder, it was a decision. And then, there was the question of remorse. Had Roula ever truly grieved? A mother's grief is raw, unfiltered. But Roula? She spoke of her daughters like characters in a story, one that she controlled. Outside the courtroom, the reaction was explosive. The case had gripped not just Greece but the world. Public opinion was divided. Some believed she was a cold-blooded murderer. Others thought she was the victim of a media witch hunt. But the one thing everyone agreed on? The truth had to come out. Neighbors spoke of Roula's past behavior. Family members were questioned. Had the warning signs been there all along? And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for. The verdict. The world watched as the jury made their decision. Guilty or innocent? The final chapter of this harrowing case was about to be written. Coming up next, the verdict, the sentencing, and the final unraveling of Roula Pispirigou. 3 lives gone. A mother accused. A nation divided. The case of Roula Pispirigou may have reached its verdict, but the questions? They linger in the air, haunting, unanswered. Because in a story like this, the truth is never as simple as it seems. As we look back on this case, we must ask ourselves, what do we truly know? And what remains hidden in the shadows? We know that 3 innocent children lost their lives under chillingly similar circumstances. We know that forensic evidence, specifically the discovery of ketamine, was the turning point in this case. We know that Roula Pispirigou was the only adult present in those crucial moments before Georgina's death. And we know that her responses, her actions, her coldness raised red flags among doctors and investigators alike. But what don't we know? Could she have acted alone? Or is there a missing piece? Someone else who knew, who suspected but stayed silent. What about her husband Manos? He claims he knew nothing, that he never saw signs of abuse. But can a father be so blind? Did he truly have no suspicions? Or was he simply unwilling to face them? And then, there's the biggest question of all. Why? Was it about control? Tension? Was Roula Pispirigou suffering from a psychological disorder? Or was she simply evil? As shocking as this case is, it's not the first. And it won't be the last. Throughout history we've seen this before. Mothers who were meant to protect, who instead became executioners. Andrea Yates, a mother of 5, who drowned her own children one by one in a bathtub, later diagnosed with severe postpartum psychosis. Diane Downs, a woman who shot her own children, just to be with a man who didn't want them. These cases force us to confront something terrifying. That sometimes, evil doesn't come from the outside. Sometimes it comes from within the home. Roula Pispirigou will likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. But does justice bring closure? Or does it simply leave us with more questions? The death of a child is the greatest tragedy of all. But when the person responsible is their own mother, the horror becomes something else entirely. So now we turn to you. Do you believe Roula Pispirigou is guilty beyond all doubt? Or could there still be another side to this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dive investigations into the darkest corners of the human mind, make sure you're subscribed. Because the world is full of mysteries. And sometimes, the most terrifying ones are the stories we think we already know.